Hello everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Slacking with Slacker Steve. Now, usually I do these things live, but I decided to script this one out, which I might do going forward if I end up liking how it works out, so let me know what you think. Let's talk about Discovery's second season. It took me a little time to get to it, just because it was a CBS exclusive. It was hard for me to get access to it, but, I managed to borrow the password to a friend's CBS All Access service, so I did get to catch up. So I've seen all the episodes that are out and most of the shorts. I haven't watched the one where the Discovery is like in the future apparently yet, which I'm really curious to watch, so I'll probably watch this like after this soon, hopefully. Now, side note, I wish that they would broadcast it on network TV. I feel like putting it on this obscured paid streaming platform is hurting it. Sure, you'll get the super fans of Trek to sign up for it, but you're not going to get any of the people that sit on their couch, throw on the TV, and let it play its schedule. And I'm sure there are some people that aren't interested in Star Trek that would probably end up liking Discovery. I think they're only hurting themselves with this. But we aren't here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about my thoughts on Discovery. Or STD, as the people who think they are clever like to call it. Even though whenever I see anyone referring to any of the other series, they never include Star Trek or STD as part of their acronym. It's not STV for Voyager, it's VOI. Like, Enterprise is ENT, so it doesn't really work. It's not clever. Like, I like a negative joke as much as anybody, but it's not clever. Move on. I've seen many people online talking about the show and how it isn't Star Trek and whatnot. Some complaints about the canon, the look of the show, and the storytelling. I thought I'd address it myself since I, too, have opinions. Now, perhaps it's, the internet that amplifies it, but whenever I get on a thread about some series that I really like, a lot of times I end up going, oh, that episode was cool, let's see what other people think about it. And I just don't see a lot of people, enjoying TV anymore. It seems like most people just watch TV shows to shit on it anymore, and I think that's a shame. Almost in anything I watch, especially if I'm a fan of the franchise, I will find something to enjoy about it. Even if something about the writing bothers me, I usually adapt and, find some ways to fit it into my enjoyment. Now, many people talk about Discovery like it's the worst thing that's ever happened to science fiction. And I feel that it's mostly disingenuous. I also have some criticisms of the show, which we're going to get into. Season 1 had some rough moments for me, but I'd like to point out that the worst episode of Discovery Season 1 is better than the best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but when I think of The Next Generation being its best, it started in Season 3. Now, don't get me wrong, when I'm a fan of something, I own even the worst parts. Sometimes, for me anyway, the corny and badly written episodes of a season provides me as much entertainment because I grew up watching them back when we didn't have a choice what we had on TV. So a lot of times I just ended up watching these shows over and over again and ended up liking them for what they are. For instance, The Naked Now is just totally ridiculous, but I really like seeing the cast members trying to do their best to make that script good. Now, Discovery, on the other hand, it's visually great. The acting's great. I can tell the cast enjoy making the show. For me, that's kind of the most important part. Not picking apart minute details, not overanalyzing statements made in other series and acting as it's gospel. I examine everything on its own merits, and for me, it's at least a good sci-fi show. I think I can at least put it that way. A lot of the characters are great. For me, Tilly's a great character, Stamets is a great character. I do like Michael. I know a lot of people call her a Mary Sue, which I think is ridiculous, but I ended up really liking the cast, and I think Pike was actually a really good addition. I like the guy that's playing him. In the shorts that they aired before Season 2, there's one about Mudd, and I thought it was a great callback to the original series episodes, Mudd's Women and I, Mudd. Since he has all of these, androids, I thought that was a really good touch. And the new Mudd has actually become one of my more favorites. Overall, the series in general just feels a lot different to the other ones, and that's just due to a change on how they're written. All of the other series have been episodic, and this one has a big overarching story. Sure, Deep Space Nine flirted with making serial episodes, but it was more interspersed with one-off episodes that changed things up a bit. The other example I can think of is the Xindi War in Enterprise's third season. It's something I felt that kind of went on for a little too long. But now we're moving into mostly serialized episodes, and I do think it makes it feel less Star Trek. At least the Star Trek that we all know. Now, the episodes that I've mentioned so far, like, those are the ones that stand out to me. I remember the plot as a whole, but I couldn't really tell you a specific episode. In the other series, each episode was contained, and therefore, when I connected with something, I remembered that episode better. I could name off a billion episodes of each series I love, which I won't subject you to this time. But when I think back to Discovery, I couldn't really name a specific episode. So perhaps this focus on serialization makes it more difficult to fit the more strange and imaginative episodes in the past, and those were the ones that really stuck out. Like, as much as everybody shits on Threshold, we all remember it because it was the Salamander episode. So, because of this reason, I can see why longtime fans of the series say it doesn't really feel like Star Trek. However, I kind of choose to reject that line of thinking because, after 50 years, they just decided to try something new. I don't necessarily believe that change is always a bad thing. My mind may change as more of this show goes on, but with the 24th century shows, there were tons of episodes to love, but if you really think back, just as many to not. So moving on to some of the issues with canon, that's the other thing that people complain about a lot about, and this is actually the biggest point for myself too. This is where I have the hardest time, fitting this all together. I have no idea how they plan to explain all of this with the canon of the original series. The names and locations are all correct, but the technology is more advanced than the stuff that we even saw in the 24th century shows, like the holograms. They flirted with that a little bit in Deep Space Nine, and then they just completely abandoned it. And now we're seeing people have conversations with holograms, and even made fun of the fact that Pike still uses the screen. But if it was so commonplace, then why do everybody use screens in the 24th century? So it just doesn't really make sense to me. And the Klingon culture just does not seem correct for the time. And the changes that they're expecting me to make in my head makes it hard for me to imagine a culture that changes that much in 7 years or so, even despite the fact that they look completely different. But Star Trek does have some precedent for things that may explain this. I could be completely wrong, and if it doesn't happen this way, and they put out something that completely contradicts it, then whatever. But I think this can be explained by borrowing some context from the Next Generation episode Parallels. For those that need a refresher, this is the one where Worf keeps slipping into different quantum realities. Some incredibly similar, some vastly different. Now, it's been said that Discovery is not in the alternate timeline from the movies, and apparently it's set before the events of Star Trek, the original series, but it feels like to me that it's just in another reality. It's a reality where everything folds out slightly different, but the names and events are incredibly similar. Think of it this way. The temporal Cold War in Enterprise pretty much shattered the idea that fluid, linear time can exist, because people centuries in the future are all meddling and correcting things probably faster than anyone can keep up with. If you think of Discovery as less before the original series and more after Enterprise, this makes more sense. Now, think of all the time travel episodes we've witnessed. Many of the events of Enterprise probably did transpire in the original series that we know, but because of the meddling in the timeline, it created a Xindi War that we reasonably assume probably didn't happen in the original series. It isn't exactly the same timeline. I think in the same timeline as the original series from the 1960s, there was an NX-01 captained by Jonathan Archer, and since James T. Kirk knows his history, he knows all about him and that mission, but that James T. Kirk we see on screen recalled a much different version of history than the Jonathan Archer that we ended up seeing. So considering Discovery is a sequel to Enterprise, and not necessarily a prequel to the original series, it makes it a lot easier for me to stomach than just trying to assume that everything is forced onto the same timeline. Perhaps another quantum event happened that changed Klingon culture between the events of Enterprise and Discovery. We don't know. I've seen statements that they are going to explain the discrepancies, and I'm not sure if I'm right by what I'm explaining here, but Star Trek has always loved time travel and alternate realities, and given some of the strange things we've seen with the Spore Drive, it's certainly possible we will see a retcon that ends up working with canon. Or maybe I'm completely wrong, and they're throwing canon out the window, in which case I just wasted your time. So to conclude, do I like Discovery? Yeah, I like the production of the show. I like the cast and the characters. Some of the story writing can be shaky, but I enjoyed the Mirror Universe plot in season 1, and I'm curious to see where this whole Red Angel thing takes it. I'm going to give Discovery some time to breathe and let it do its own thing. Whether anyone else does or not, I mean, that's their prerogative. So thanks for watching. If you liked it, let me know. If you didn't like it, I guess also let me know. And we'll see you next time, hopefully.